Hello and welcome to Frederick Community College, Mid-Atlantic Center for Emergency Management and Public Safety. I'm Kathy Francis, Executive Director, and I represent a talented group of individuals providing academic, training, and professional services nationwide. Today, we're here to leverage our experienced partner network and reinforce the value of information sharing. Join me to welcome Amy Lepore, President of Anthem Planning Incorporated, as our outstanding partner on the collaborative Public Safety Technology Interview Series. Amy?
Kathy, thank you again for including us this week, and thank you to your incredible team for their production of this video series. We are having an absolute blast. Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Lepore with Anthem Planning, and we're happy to have John Contestabile here today to talk about an incredibly important topic, interoperability. And, while we were preparing for this discussion, I realized that increasingly we see our clients have a need to merge and use in real time a series of data points, and it feels like a daunting task. So I'm glad we have John here today. He can speak about this. And as always, Anthem folks like to hear about how public safety organizations are addressing privacy concerns. And I know we'll dig into that just a bit with John as well. So John, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me today.
So to our audience, have you ever wished you had a team of experts in your back pocket able to explain public safety technology when the jargon gets to be just too much? Well, our collaborative interview series has been designed to build you that expert team, and we're delighted to welcome John Contestabile today. John is the Director of Public Safety Solutions at Skyline Technology Solutions. He has dedicated his career to supporting the public safety community, from operations to education to consulting services. He's accustomed to developing solutions for a wide variety of governmental sponsors in Homeland Security, transportation, and critical infrastructure. John's dedicated over 30 years of his career in service to the state of Maryland Department of Transportation, where he served in technical, engineering, and management roles and concluded the position as the Acting Assistant Secretary for Administration. John, welcome. Would you like to share any more about your background with our audience today?
Sure. Thank you, Kathy. I think the only thing I would add also is I did a stint with the governor's office as the Deputy Homeland Security Advisor after 9/11. And that also gave me a keen appreciation for the public safety roles and responsibilities across the whole spectrum of public safety, from EMS to law enforcement to utility companies, transportation, fire service. I got a pretty good experience across that whole spectrum after 9/11. So it's been quite a ride. I spent some time with Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab after state service, and now, of course, I'm with Skyline Technology. So thank you, and thanks for having me here today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, John, we're glad to have you, and we know we'll dig into interoperability, and we're wondering, so there's an increasing demand for systems to interoperate in the public safety environment. Can you talk a little bit with the audience about why this is so important?
Sure. It's really important because if you do any after action reports for any kind of emergency incident, you'll see that communications always comes up as a sticking point typically. And historically, we focused on voice interoperability. And what that kind of means is, can my 800 megahertz land mobile radio system talk to your 450 megahertz land mobile radio system? But as time has gone on, and with the advent of broadband technologies now, LTE and cellular communications, the focus has been increasingly been on data interoperability. So our ability to share information and share data is really directly proportional to how well you're going to handle an event. So that's kind of what I wanted to chat a little bit about today. As you can see in the slides, what is the need, how might it be accomplished, and what are the benefits and the challenges?
So John, a lot of data collected across all levels of government for every incident type. What type of information is important to organizations, and what needs to be shared?
Well, if we go to the next slide, I want to touch on this briefly. Basically, this slide indicates that based on the incident scale, will determine what type of information and how important the need is to share information. Localized incidents all the way over to the left there, minor traffic incidents, a vehicle fire, an accident with injuries but no fatalities. It's the old 80-20 rule. That's 80% of your incidents are localized types of events. But as you move to the right on this scale to a regional-wide event, which might be multiple counties, or a statewide event, which could be like a hurricane or tropical storm in Maryland, as an example, or a national event, which 9/11 would exemplify that sort of thing. The public preparedness drops way off as you move from left to right on this chart. And the need for interoperability grows quite a bit because the number of agencies involved, the number of disciplines involved, and the number of jurisdictions involved all increase as you move to the right. And so when I say incident scale, I not only mean the physical footprint of the incident, but also the reach of the incident. Like on 9/11 as an example, even though physically it occurred largely in New York and in Washington, D.C., we shut the air transportation system down, if you recall. And we went without flights for several days, if not weeks. And so the reach of that incident was national in scale, even though it was physically located in only a couple of jurisdictions. Supply chain is another example. I mean, you're seeing that in COVID today. So incident scale is really an important concept for people to understand, because as you move over to the right, you have a greater need for information sharing. So the next slide kind of shows what types of information is involved. I had a friend of mine, Mike Fisher, who used to be with Maryland State Police, said to me once, he says, John, he says, you technologists make this so hard. And I said, oh, really, Mike? He says, sure. He says, if you're having a bad day, there's only 4 questions you want to answer. Where is it? Can we talk about it? What do we know about it? And can we see it? And I laughed, but it stuck in my head. And I said, there's a lot of wisdom there. I said, because where is it is all about GIS and GPS, global positioning systems. Where is the event physically, spatially? And where are my assets? Can we talk about it is what I mentioned earlier, voice interoperability. Can I talk to you on the radio? Can I interoperate on a voice level? And then what do we know about it is access to information. And that would be both fixed data sets. For example, how many people live in this 10-block area we have to evacuate? That might have come from the census data as an example. But it's also sensor information. What's the weather station saying? What's the flood gauge, stream gauge saying about the situation? And then, of course, can we see it is all about video. So can we get eyes on it? And so those 4 questions really drive a lot of technology systems and information types that are important during any kind of emergency. And so if you're in public safety, you need to be thinking about these types of systems and whether you have them, what their reach is, how you can manipulate data within these systems.
So, John, I'm thinking about the slide that was up previously that showed the continuum of local to national level incidents. And can you talk a little bit about how that suggested model has held up during the pandemic?
Well, it holds up because you have to have information to create some sort of real-time situational awareness during an event. And it could be the pandemic, it could be an explosion, it could be a fire, but you want to answer these 4 types of questions during an event. So where is it? We have information from all 50 states in terms of how many COVID cases they have, how many fatalities they have. Can we talk about it? I mean, a variation of that is you have all the state emergency management agencies activated, and they're sharing on HSIN and other networks information across the states. What do we know about it? You've seen dashboards that have been built, some by my former employer, Johns Hopkins University, has built a very widely used dashboard that shows kind of trending, if you will, the flatten the curve. So these are all tools that you use to create some sort of dashboard or situational awareness around an incident so that the decision makers can have the information they need to make good decisions. That's really what it's all about at the end of the day. And if I could add, if we go to the next slide, what I learned when I was with the state of Maryland, I was what was called the SWIC, the Statewide Interoperability Coordinator. I was on detail to Maryland State Police, really thinking hard about how do we improve communication interoperability across public safety agencies. And it became clear to me that you have to have a conceptual approach to this problem. And this problem, what you see up here is kind of a high-level concept of the three-layer interoperability approach. And what it says is that data systems live down at the data layer. And those are the legacy systems we all have. That could be a land mobile radio system, voice system. It could be a GIS system. It could be video cameras. But those are the legacy systems that each agency buys to perform a certain business function for that agency. Well, those systems typically are not bought with the idea of sharing information outside the agency. And so if incident scale says, as an incident grows, you've got to be able to share information with your partners, then getting the information out of those legacy systems in the data layer to the first responders who are up in the presentation layer, if you look at the top, really requires that you take some action to unlock that data, to make it accessible, to make it shareable, and to publish it beyond your agency. And what we've learned is that systems at the data layer are what they are. They were bought 10 years ago, 20 years ago, some of these systems, and they are not designed for today's internet, broadband sharing kind of environment. The other thing that is what it is the presentation layer. Increasingly, that's your smartphone. So you want to be able to get information on your hip across a broadband network in real time. And so, like bookends, the presentation layer and the data layer kind of are what they are. So if you're going to improve interoperability, the way you need to go about it is you need to build a middle layer called the integration layer, where you basically access the data in the data layer, liberate it, make it transportable, make it digestible to other systems, and then you can publish it into the presentation layer to the end user. And so this is the conceptual approach we use, and you see it in COVID. Those dashboards that Johns Hopkins has built and others have built and others, they're building an integration layer, consuming data that's relevant to that incident and putting it out in a consumable way so that you can get it on your phone, you can get it on your desktop, and the decision makers have the information they need to make good decisions. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And John, part of your work is to assist organizations as they receive, store, and share video. Can we see it in a video form? We haven't spoken with anyone else about video, but we know our audience has an increased interest in this capability. What can you tell us?
Well, that last question of can we see it? Public safety agencies want to get eyes on the event as soon as they can. That helps them dispatch the right resources to make sure that they're sending the right amount of people, the right types of equipment into the scene. So there's a desire to get eyes on. Agencies today really have to get a handle on their video content, because with license plate readers, with body cameras, with drone video, with fixed camera video, we are swimming in video. And if you're a public safety agency that hasn't paid attention to how you access, store, share video content, you're at a real disadvantage. And I know we're not talking about next generation 911, but as you know, the call centers, public safety answering points, the PSAPs, are all migrating to next generation 911. And a central piece of that migration is to be able to get text, photos, and video into the call center. And so increasingly, public safety has to figure out what they're going to do with video, how they're going to manage it, and how you transport it, how you access it, who you share it with securely. So these are all issues that really are front and center these days. And it's one of the things that my company, Skyline, really focuses on, actually. So.
Great, thank you. John, we often talk about interoperability. What does that really mean for the future of public safety communication?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I have a graphic that I use to try to explain where this is all going. And it's a Venn diagram that shows mission, content, and transport. It's kind of important to think about it across these three dimensions. The mission defines what the public safety entity is trying to accomplish. And the mission really is the driver behind what content is needed, what information is needed in order to deal with that incident. And so the mission is really the most important element because that drives everything else. It drives what quality of data is needed, who can access the data that they need to accomplish the mission, when the data is needed. We like to talk about getting the right information to the right person at the right time. And so the mission really frames out what the requirements are. But what I find sometimes people don't grasp is, okay, that mission requires that certain content be made available. So as an example, if you have an active shooter incident, one of the things you're going to want to know is what is a roster of students and teachers in the school. So the data set you're looking for is the roster for that school on that day. Can you get it? That's content. That is the content. Another thing, to go back to that example of an active shooter, is you may want to get video from inside the school. The school has security cameras. Can you access that video from somewhere other than the principal's office? And so there's various types of content that is relevant to that mission. And so can that content, that data, be discovered? Is it accessible? Do you have the permissions to access it? Is it formatted correctly? And can you share it with other parties that may be responding or have a role to play? So the mission drives the requirements. That drives the need for certain types of content that's relevant. But then that content has to be pushed across a transport network so that it gets to the end user who needs the information. If you remember the three-layer model, that would be the person in the presentation layer. So that you have to transport that content from where it lives in the data layer in some agency to where it needs to be, the first responder who's responding to an incident. And so the transport could be wired across fiber. It could be wireless across Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, wireless networks to a smartphone and to the responding officer. So this model has helped people really think through, the pieces of the puzzle. This model and the three-layer model are really the centerpiece of how you wrap your head around what types of data do we need, how do we access it, how do we move it from where it lives to where it needs to go. And it's going to vary because moving video can be a lot more difficult given the bandwidth requirements than it is moving, say, a roster of the school, which I mentioned earlier. So this helps paint a picture for what public safety agencies need to be thinking about as they wrestle with this interoperability challenge.
Thank you, John.
So, John, going back to the benefits and challenges, so with respect to integrated systems, if we added a continuum of privacy, where do you think integrated systems would fall, and how does your work and Skyline's work seek to address risk?
This kind of illustrates what we mean by an integrated system. In the old days, we built kind of separate systems. In this graphic, it's state and local. It could just as easily be federal and state. But basically, it's different jurisdictions funded their own public safety technologies, and they built them largely for their own business use case. And they were not designed to really share or be interoperable with other jurisdictions. And so if you look at the graphic down the bottom, you really have to consider governance and costs and interoperability. And so from an interoperability standpoint, separate systems are not very good because they don't share. They were designed to not share, really. From a governance standpoint, it's very easy to build separate systems because you have your system and I have my system. And so I do what I want with my system. But from a cost standpoint, it actually costs more to build separate systems. And why is that? Because you're duplicating infrastructure. In a voice example, you could look up on a hill and see 3 towers there. And you might recognize that one of those towers might be for a federal radio system, One of them might be for a state radio system, and one of them might be for a county or a local radio system. And as a taxpayer, you say, boy, couldn't they have gotten by with one tower? And the answer is maybe. I know there's interference issues and such, but nonetheless, you really duplicate infrastructure from towers to backhaul to radio systems to antennas. And so it really costs more to build separate systems because you're not sharing the infrastructure costs across a wider base of users. So if you contrast this as you move to the right in this graphic, in the name of interoperability, they said, well, let's connect our systems. And so we would build a little connector between systems. So say in the voice example, we could now talk channel A to channel B with the local agency. And that would be great. And they go, now we're interoperable. Maybe we should integrate a little more tightly. And so you might build a more integrated system where you're sharing 2 or 3 different channels, okay? And then ultimately you might get to the same, to what we're calling a fuse system in this graphic, where you're sharing the tower, you're sharing the backhaul, you're sharing the radio system. You might have dedicated channels for your county, and you might have dedicated channels for your county, but it's essentially the same infrastructure. So the good news about that is it drives down costs because you're sharing infrastructure. And from an interoperability standpoint, it's way better because now we have different channels which we can communicate on. But the problem is, from a governance standpoint, it's really hard. So I can't do what I want with my system because now whatever I do to that system might affect you since you're on that system with me. And so this is what we mean when we talk about integrated systems and the challenges. It's important to note that we don't do too much of all the way to the left, separate systems anymore, if only because nobody seems to have enough money to go do whatever they want to do on their own. And we really don't build a lot of the systems all the way to the right because they're hard to get consensus among different jurisdictions to cooperate and build a shared system. So the reality is we're building systems somewhere in the middle. And I guess what I hope to accomplish with this graphic is that ought to be an explicit conversation. You ought to talk to your neighboring jurisdictions. You should talk to your regional. You should talk to the other partners and decide where you want to fall in the system continuum and what makes sense for you. Because as you do it, you have to tackle the issue of privacy, as you said. You have to share these systems securely, but then you also have to parse out the data and the privileges and the access to make sure that it's done in a secure and private manner. Obviously, there's HIPAA requirements with sharing health information that have to be respected. And you can design these systems with encryption and other tools and techniques, but it has to be built into the program in order to preserve privacy and preserve the interoperability you need. But there is a tension between sharing information, being interoperable, and yet being secure and respecting privacy requirements. So there is a balance there, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, John, thank you for joining us today to talk about information sharing and all the conditions that we need to monitor, and certainly the benefits and the challenges of today's integrated system and its continuum. We really appreciate your time, appreciate the time of Amy and Anthem Planning and the Mesa and Public Safety team to help put this interview series on. And to our audience, we've gathered the best and brightest minds in the field to help break down these fast-moving technologies and to continue to keep tabs on our industry trends and enhance your knowledge and your agency's ability to respond. We hope you'll join us every week for your Monday briefing tips and tricks from our experts to help make your implementation of technology that much easier. John, thank you for joining us.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. And I appreciate what you're doing with the series because sometimes this stuff can be a little bit complex, and helping us break it down and make it understandable to everyone is important. Thank you.